Well, guys, we have finally arrived to the final part of the English Civil War series by Kings and Generals. The link to this video is down below. If you like my commentary or my thoughts or any of my content and you want to help support this channel, feel free to please like, comment, and subscribe. It would mean the world to me. And with that said, and without further ado, let's wrap this series up, shall we?
Dealt a mortal blow to the Scottish cause, and by 1652 the kingdom was fully absorbed into the natal Commonwealth of England. After this, Cromwell's young regime had assumed control over the whole Isle of Great Britain, but there were still affairs of the state beyond the island's shores for him to settle. The brutality of Cromwell's army during the Irish campaign that occurred between 1649 and 1650 is considered by many to be a black stain on the career of an already controversial man, and his policies in Ireland in the years that followed did little to improve his reputation among the denizens of the Emerald Isle, both past and present. The massacres at Drogheda and Wexford had only inflamed the Catholic Gael's resolve to push back against the Puritan tide. But by the end of 1651, the last major native strongholds of Limerick and Galway had been put under siege by parliamentary forces and starved into submission. After this, the Irish no longer had the resources or manpower to take the new model army head-on, but they continued to fight on using asymmetrical guerrilla tactics. As many as 30,000 men went into hiding in bogs, mountains, and forests. Living as outlaws, they struck out against isolated patrols and supply wagons, turning the entire countryside into a practical kill zone for any English soldier who dared step more than 2 miles beyond his military camp.
Dang, that's terrifying. Again, we already see Cromwell's contempt for the Irish, who he called, barbaric, and obviously he did not endure himself to them. And now guerrilla warfare. Guerrilla warfare is always usually pretty effective and kind of terrifying. So now that it's been reduced to a guerrilla war, yeah, that's not good. Again, Cromwell definitely is a very brutal and ruthless guy. And yeah.
Cromwell's response was indiscriminately brutal. Under his purview, parliamentarian forces systematically destroyed the food stocks of any counties suspected to be supplying the rebels. This resulted in an island-wide famine, which in turn facilitated an outbreak of bubonic plague.
Oh my gosh.
In total, the combination of warfare, famine, and disease took a catastrophic toll, killing anywhere between 20 to 40% of Ireland's total population.
That's insane. Holy crap. Oh, wow. Dude, yeah, definitely I can see why Cromwell's kind of remembered in a villainous light all these years later. Because, yeah, that's bad. That's bad, him contributing to that, you know?
Additionally, another 50,000 or so Irish captives were reduced to indentured servitude and shipped overseas to the English colonies in North America and the Caribbean. In 1652, fueled by his disdain for the Catholic faith and his desire to put an end to unrest on the island once and for all, Cromwell instituted a slew of openly discriminatory policies against the native population and its church. All Catholics were banished from all major Irish towns, which had been predominantly Anglo-Protestant in character since before the war, while bounties were put on Catholic priests, who were hunted and executed. On top of all this, massive swathes of land were seized from Catholic landowners, even those who had not taken part in the rebellion, and given to Protestants, often veterans of the new model army. By 1652, Ireland was at England's mercy, and all 3 kingdoms in the titular War of the Three Kingdoms were under the full control of Oliver Cromwell's regime. However, his English Commonwealth still had one more war to fight. For decades, England and the Dutch Republic had been chummy with one another, with the former supporting the latter in its war for independence against the Spanish Empire. However, throughout the English Civil War, these relations had become increasingly strained, as both royalists and parliamentarians had placed embargoes on Dutch merchant ships suspected of trading with the opposite side. This, in combination with a slew of other trading disputes born from the consequences of wartime chaos, resulted in the outbreak of open war between the two powers. Ultimately, neither side was able to decisively crush the other in this conflict, which was overwhelmingly fought at sea. However, the English emerged with the upper hand, with their freebooting privateers having invoked the spirit of Sir Francis Drake and wreaked havoc among Dutch merchant shipping lanes, crippling the Hollanders' economy. From the moment he had relieved King Charles's royal neck from his royal shoulders, Cromwell's natal Commonwealth had been in an incredibly precarious position. However, after his parade of military triumphs, from the subjugation of Scotland and Ireland to the humbling of the Netherlands, his infantile English Republic had gained international legitimacy.
Honestly, the way he's managed to turn his regime into this powerhouse is kind of insane. Just the rise of Cromwell and how he has, like, not only the Isles by, like, he's ruling them basically with an iron fist at this point, but now going off and fighting other, countries and gaining victory. It is really impressive, in terms of a militaristic sense, what Cromwell achieved, though you do see, like, the ruthlessness more in display now that he has more power.
Earning official recognition from the French, Spanish, Dutch, and Danes, asserting control over its New World colonies in Barbados and North America, and nullifying any further threat of royalist invasions. Although the military record of Cromwell's Commonwealth was practically glowing, its domestic situation left much to be desired. By 1651, Parliament was essentially a skeleton crew, down to half its original membership due to extensive purges during the Civil War. This chronically understaffed body politic, known as the Rump Parliament, proved itself utterly incompetent at composing legislation, such as when they passed the 1651 Navigation Act, an aggressively protectionist import and export policy which directly led to the aforementioned war with the Dutch Republic. Following the deposition of their monarchy and the dawn of a new age, the people of England, Cromwell included, were clamouring for extensive reforms. In this, the Rump Parliament also consistently failed to meet expectations, failing to address the religious and social issues of their day, and in general just failing to get anything done except for the self-congratulatory re-election of their own members. By the 20th of April 1653, Cromwell had grown fed up with this incompetency and gathered his army to eject the MPs from Westminster at gunpoint, temporarily eliminating all vestiges of civilian government in the Commonwealth and putting the military back in charge of England.
My goodness, like I said, like, very... like, I can see why people call him tyrannical, but, like, he's basically just turned into might makes right. That's kind of his approach now to things, and he just has this army that's unstoppable, and he can just do whatever he wants in that sense. It's kind of terrifying, Cromwell's development, as he becomes more ruthless, and you see this kind of, like darker side to him,
Thereafter, Cromwell and his High Army Command took the formation of a new parliament into their own hands. By July 4th, they had appointed 140 new men to Westminster. This new parliament, known as the Nominated Parliament, was an unelected body, chosen not by the people but by a small group of military elites. In theory, its members were supposed to represent the diverse peoples of England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland. In practice, the representatives from Scotland and Ireland were English soldiers who had been appointed there after the English Commonwealth's subjugation of those two countries. Cromwell's rationale was that, by handpicking only people who were appropriately godly and sympathetic to religious reforms, that he would form a state apparatus that was unified in purpose and would actually get stuff done. Unfortunately, just being godly and generally open to change turned out to be too broad a qualification. Ultimately, the nominated parliament became an eclectic mess of colliding worldviews, with pragmatic lawyers who wanted sensible legal revisions clashing with doomsday preachers, esoteric mystics, and all other manner of religious zealots. This ideological schizophrenia ultimately paralyzed any attempt at productive cooperation, and after 5 months of constant infighting, the nominated parliament dissolved itself on December 12, 1653, and returned power back to Cromwell and the army.
Oh my goodness.
For the second time in 8 months, the existing government and constitution had collapsed, and in the resulting power vacuum,
it is amazing that, yeah, the monarchy does get restored, and it wasn't by some militaristic victory, it's just Cromwell's side just kind of fell apart on its own. They won the war, they won the military side of it, they just imploded from within, though. Which is just an interesting way to kind of, like, I guess, lose, I guess? Like, it feels complicated to just say the word lose, but yeah, I guess Cromwell at the end, his change doesn't last, at least because the monarchy returns, so I guess that's kind of a loss there.
effective governmental control had reverted to the military and its commander-in-chief. Cromwell is often portrayed as a power-hungry tyrant, but to his credit, despite being given every opportunity to become a military dictator, he consistently tried to make a representative civilian government work. After the collapse of the nominated parliament, he and his military elites went back to the drawing board. By the 16th of December, one of his most decorated field commanders, Major General John Lambert, had come up with a new blueprint for governance. This was a document known as the Instrument of Government, which holds the distinction of being the first sovereign codified and written constitution in English history.
Wow.
The Instrument of Government proposed a government of 3 tiers. The first tier would be a parliament of 400 men, who this time would actually be elected by the constituents they represented. The second would be a 15-man Council of State. The third tier would be the Lord Protector, a single man who held supreme executive power and would serve as the head of state. It should come as no surprise whatsoever which man was assigned to take up this prestigious mantle.
Yeah, makes sense.
On the 16th of December 1653, the new government was put into place, and Cromwell was officially inaugurated as the Lord Protector of the Commonwealth of England, Scotland and Ireland. Despite his new grandiose title, Lord Protector Cromwell was not an absolute dictator by any means. All 3 branches of his new government had checks upon each other, while the Lord Protector himself required the majority consent of his Council of State before taking many actions, such as making use of the military when Parliament was not sitting, or declaring war on foreign powers.
Yeah, definitely. That is an interesting aspect, because like I said, Cromwell definitely does, I've heard, like, some people definitely hold him to a very, negative view in history, of a negative legacy, almost viewing him as just a complete villain. But he is trying, at least, with the government here. So this definitely does kind of give a bit more ambiguity to the man and a bit more grayness, you know what I mean? He's not just like, I'm taking all power now, it's all me now, Though he had some shades of that, he is still trying, which is, like I said, I think in history, people can be more complex than just pure evil or good. Granted, there are people who are just that, like Hitler, for example, he's just pure evil. But, like here, like, there are some shades, kind of like, there is some complexity with certain people that you can kind of look at different aspects of them and be like, well, yeah, they were bad in some areas, but other areas they showed some different traits. So I don't know. I think it's a very interesting look into Cromwell.
Unfortunately, Cromwell's lofty ideals of a free and representative democracy did not survive the realities of what such a thing entailed. Since elections for the first Protectorate Parliament were held freely, it resulted in many of Cromwell's enemies being sent to Westminster, including Scottish Presbyterians, Royalists, fierce critics of the new model army, and members of the old Rump Parliament, who had a bone to pick with the Lord Protector for having run them out of their previous job at gunpoint.
Oh boy, the consequences of his actions catching back up with him. Again, just like, yeah, democracy, well, people have voices, so they're just coming back to now nag him. That's hilarious.
It did not take long for Cromwell to become fed up, as his political goals were consistently thwarted by his opponents in Parliament, who were constantly trying to limit the Lord Protector's power and reduce the size of his army. Meanwhile, all the way over in the New World, Cromwell's navy captured the island of Santiago from the Spanish, which would become the English colony of Jamaica. In early 1655, Cromwell's contentious relationship with the First Protectorate Parliament came to a head when they tried to pass a radical constitutional reform bill that would increase their power at Cromwell's expense. The Lord Protector's response was blunt and authoritarian. On January 22nd, he dissolved Parliament. There was a poetic irony in this action, for it ultimately made Cromwell just as despotic as the late headless Charles I, who had...
Yeah, you either die the hero or live long enough to become the villain, right? Kind of the similarities. Cromwell's such a fascinating person, like, there's so much you can analyze with him. He really is just an interesting guy, and just seeing, like, some of his traits, like, seem to be, you know, kind of like, yeah, he's trying to do something new, but then he has other traits where just like he mentioned authoritarian, and like doing this, which is funny because this all started with Charles dissolving Parliament and stuff, and now look at Cromwell now doing the same thing, proving he's no better at the end. Like, there is something like poetic about that.
Been equally happy to take the proverbial ball and go home whenever Parliament had not towed his party line. Cromwell's slide into authoritarianism continued in March, when one Sir John Penruddock, a devout royalist, launched an uprising against the Commonwealth to restore the Prince-in-Exile Charles II to the throne of England. This revolt was, to put it bluntly, pathetic. Penruddock was barely able to muster more than 300 men to his cause,
that sucks.
and the insurrection was put down within less than 3 days. Penruddock may have been as much of a threat to Cromwell as an ant is to a boot, but his uprising gave the Lord Protector the excuse he needed to scrap the constitution and install a military dictatorship known as the Rule of the Major Generals. In this new system, England and Wales were split up into 12 districts, each ruled directly by a titular Major General from Cromwell's army. In a reflection of Cromwell's own religious leanings, these military despots were often dour, joyless Puritans who banned ungodly behaviour such as music, heavy drinking, dances, fairs, and the celebration of Christmas. Unsurprisingly, these no-fun-allowed generalissimos were extremely unpopular among the general population, and resulted in a plummeting of public support for Lord Protector Cromwell and his regime. By 1656, Cromwell had buckled under public pressure, thrown his major generals under the proverbial bus, and reconstituted Parliament. However, this second Protectorate Parliament was downright regressive compared to the first. For one thing, its members were no longer democratically elected, but, like the nominated Parliament, were hand-picked by Cromwell from among his supporters. Any dissidents in the first Protectorate Parliament who had opposed him had been purged. On the 26th of June 1657, Oliver Cromwell was ritually reinstated as Lord Protector in Westminster Hall. This lavish ceremony was a coronation in all but name. Cromwell was sat upon King Edward's chair, invested with a purple ermine-lined robe, and bestowed upon with a sword of justice and a sceptre. It should be noted that although Cromwell's toady parliament had offered to crown him king, he adamantly refused, insisting on maintaining the title of Lord Protector. However, with his slide into authoritarianism and his
look at this presentation. This is a king. You can't convince me otherwise. He is a king in all but name, essentially. Because look at this. There's nothing humble about this. This is like a royal presentation if there ever was one.
Contempt for dissenting political voices, it was clear that the firebrand general who had deposed a tyrant on the principles of republican liberty was gone. Oliver Cromwell was now a monarch in all but name. Seeing their once dogmatic and revolutionary leader turn into the very thing they had fought to oppose, many of Cromwell's closest supporters—
"You have become the very thing you swore to destroy." Man.
began to turn on him. By the end of 1657, the Parliament, which was supposed to be stacked with his puppets, had even begun to defy him, readmitting former MPs from his previous political purges. By now, Cromwell was simply running out of steam. By 1658, the Lord Protector's health was beginning to decline, and in August of that year, his daughter died of disease at the age of 29. After that, Cromwell had more or less given up. A lifetime of fighting, politicking, and clinging to power had taken its toll. God's chosen Englishman had deposed the monarchy, but ultimately failed to establish a stable government in its place. On the 3rd of September 1658, Oliver Cromwell died of sepsis.
Yeah, what's this saying? It's easier to conquer than to rule. Like, it's harder to rule after conquest, and I feel like that kind of idea and quote applies to Cromwell. Yeah, he won the war, he dominated the war, but he just couldn't govern after that, you know? And that kind of goes to show you the difference between conquest and governing. Like, the conquest part is much easier, I think, than having to get off your horse and then basically rule and manage things. He proved incapable of it.
Following a urinary infection, his son, Richard Cromwell, succeeded him as Lord Protector, but Richard's rule was dead on arrival. Unable to control either Parliament or the army, he was quickly deposed. In his place, the Rump Parliament that his father had dissolved in 1653 resumed control over the country. In the ensuing political chaos, a royalist general, George Monk, seized control of the Rump Parliament, which ultimately facilitated a royal restoration. On the 29th of May
Just
1660, Charles II entered London after a 10-year exile and reclaimed the throne that his father had lost. The royal house of Stuart was officially back in power, and England's Republican experiment was officially over. We will talk about the history of Britain and early modern history in general.
It is amazing that Cromwell's entire side, his regime, which started off as Parliament's side, but now I'm calling it Cromwell's because it just kind of became that, it died with a whimper. It won the glorious war, but then it just fizzled out on its own and just self-imploded, essentially. Man, you know what's hilarious? The first Charles probably could have just left into, like, self-imposed exile, and this probably would have happened on its own. Well, I mean, no, probably not. Like, Cromwell needed to kind of take power and stuff. Like, who knows if, like, someone like Fairfax or someone else had ended up kind of taking the power. But either way, you kind of get what I mean. Like, at least, like, it's kind of just, like, almost anticlimactic, right? It just went out on its own. Wow, this was a great series, I have to say. Like, I was familiar with, you know, the beats of this era. Obviously, we covered the trial of Charles. I heard a lot of things about Cromwell. Like I said, his lasting stay in history, by many, kind of just write him off as a tyrant and kind of as a bad guy. And I kind of definitely kind of lean towards that, though there is more complexity, I feel, with the man. And he really is such an interesting figure, I think, as he kind of starts off one way and then dissolves into basically a monarch, becoming what he swore to destroy. He really does kind of remind me of, like, Maximilian Robespierre from, like, the French Revolution. Like, they have similarities. But, either way, this was another great series by Kings and Generals. I really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed coming along with me through this, and yeah.